All right. Well, welcome to our next Learn at Lunch with the Kentucky Museum and Heritage Alliance. I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about advocacy today. And we have three fantastic presenters with us who are going to be sharing their wonderful experience and knowledge where advocacy is concerned and how we can make our voices heard and we can make our cultural sector stronger and better in the coming months and years. So our three presenters are Maggie McAdams, Leah Hamilton, and Leah Craig. The three of them are all on our KMHA board, so we're very proud to have them working with us with KMHA and also um, lending their expertise in their other day jobs. But let me tell you a little bit about them, and then I will turn this over to them. So first of all, Maggie McAdams, she brings over a decade of museum experience to her role as the Story Center manager at the Boyle County Public Library. And before joining the Boyle County Library team, Maggie worked at museums and historic sites in Indiana, in Illinois, in Florida, in Canada, and most recently she oversaw the program department at Shaker Village of Pleasant Hill as the education and engagement manager there. Leah Hamilton. Leah is an assistant professor of arts administration at the University of Kentucky. And there she directs the arts emergency management certificates and teaches cultural policy, teaches advocacy and activism. And before moving into academia, she was the executive director of the Springfield Regional Arts Council in the Missouri Ozarks, where she practiced cultural advocacy, working with the elected officials to support artists, cultural heritage, and creative organizations in a 27-county region. And Leah Craig, last but not least, Leah has gained over 10 years of experience in the museum and nonprofit fields, working at the National Corvette Museum, the historic Paris Bourbon County Hopewell Museum, the Oklahoma History Center, and the Lee County, Alabama chapter of the American Red Cross. And Leah has a BA from Western Kentucky University and an MA from Auburn University with a certificate in public history. Three wonderful presenters, and I will turn this over to them. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat for later, or we will have a Q&A at the end of this presentation where you can ask questions. But ladies, I will turn it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Well, let's see. Okay. How does that look? Good? Okay, awesome. Thank you. So we are happy to be here. Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction. I want to just cover our agenda for today. So we are going to start off by talking about legislative nuts and bolts. Then we'll move into advocacy practices and boundaries. We will go into a few advocacy resources that are already out there that you can explore on your own time. And then we'll end by looking at current issues and calls to action. So again, all about that kind of overview of cultural advocacy. Very quickly before we get started, I just want to make sure that it's out there that this webinar is created for educational purposes and does not necessarily reflect our personal or professional opinions. Additionally, this session does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with your organizational leadership or a licensed attorney for questions about specific legal circumstances. So to get us started, Leah Craig, over to you.
All right, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. So I wanted to give a little refresher today because I think it's important if you're doing advocacy to have a good understanding of the government systems that you are working within and advocating within. So on the federal government side is where I want to start. I don't want to dive too deep into that just because hopefully in high school or whenever you got a good sense of our federal government, but do want to give you a sense of the cultural sector areas that might be affected. And these are the things that you would be contacting your senator or representative on the federal level to advocate for. So agencies that do grants such as the National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts, Institute for Museum and Library Services, those are all ones that you would contact those federal representatives about. The National Park Service, of course, they have parks all across the country, but they also have a lot of museum resources out there, the Smithsonian as well. Of course, the Historic Preservation Fund and National Trust for Historic Preservation are ones that help with the historic preservation side of things. Again, that's not a list of all the things. There's lots more, but in general, I think those are some of our bigger ones that you might see. There are also federal and tax labor issues that might come across that would affect nonprofits or cultural sector workers. There's maybe copyright, intellectual property laws that we deal with, since a lot of us deal with art or archives and things like that. The federal government also passes laws such as NAGPRA is a common one you hear about in our sector, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. There's ones dealing with historic preservation, such as the National Historic Preservation Act. There's other arts ones, et cetera. So again, these are the sorts of issues and funding sources that you would contact those federal representatives. Next slide, Maggie, please. What I really want to spend some time going on or talking about is Kentucky state government. So we have three branches of government. The executive branch is the governor. If whoever puts in the chat first, which governor that is pictured here, then you get brownie points. That's all I can give. But with the governor, you have under their direction cabinets. And so you have a cabinet secretary that leads each of those cabinets. And the ones that would hit the cultural sector the most, again, this is not an exhaustive list. You have the Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet. It is Isaac Shelby. Good job. So within that cabinet, we have the Kentucky Arts Council, Kentucky Heritage Council, Kentucky Humanities, Kentucky State Parks, Kentucky Historical Society. There's other cabinet or departments within that. The Education and Labor Cabinet has the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. So the executive branch, the governor, is directing all of those cabinets and kind of the day-to-day work of Kentucky government. And some of those agencies grant out funds to other agencies as well. So it's just something to be aware of. The legislative branch is in Kentucky called the General Assembly. The Senate has 38 districts and the House has 100 districts. There's also the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. Within the Supreme Court, you have the Administrative Office of the Courts as the administrative arm of the Supreme Court. There's a link there. I'm not going to go to it right now, but if you're interested in finding out more about the judicial branch, then that's a good resource to learn about that. But mostly I want to talk about the legislative branch today, because that's usually where you're doing advocacy work. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to go over some basics of how a bill becomes a law in Kentucky. So it's a little bit different nuance than the federal level. And again, this is a little bit of a simplified version. I'll tell you a little bit later how you can find out more. But I think hopefully this is a good overview. So a bill gets introduced into the House or the Senate. It's assigned a number in a committee. And so that number, when you hear people talking about SB 100 or HB 25, those are just made up numbers right now, but those are referring to a bill that's been introduced in that particular chamber. When it gets introduced, then it goes to committee. It can be killed at committee by they just ignore it, the committee does, or they give it several different levels of favorable readings. Then they go on to a second reading at the Rules Committee, then it goes to a third reading on the floor with open debate. A final vote is required, 2/5 for the chamber, which is 40 members, or majority of the Senate, which is 16. But it's not done yet. Then it has to go to that other, either the House chamber or the Senate for a similar process. then both chambers must agree on the final version. Once that passes, then it goes on to the governor. The governor can either sign it, basically not sign it, but allow it to still pass, or veto it. And they have 10 days to act in that way after it's received. If it's vetoed, a majority of both houses is required to overturn a veto, because right now there's a Republican supermajority in both the House and Senate. That is something that is likely right now in Kentucky. Some other kind of general things to know about this legislative process. Kentucky is in the biennial budget cycle. That means that the legislature is in control of setting the budget, and then the executive branch is the one that actually spends that money. Okay, so you might hear in the news the governor releases a budget. That's kind of the governor's suggestion of what the budget should be. Then the House and Senate give their own budgets, and then what they actually come to and agree upon is what's decided. And in Kentucky, it's a 2-year cycle. So right now, the legislator that's meeting now for 2026 is deciding the 2-year budget for fiscal year 27 and 28. So that's why it's such an important year every 2 years that the legislator meets, that they're deciding on those funding priorities. Also, a good thing to know is the appropriations and revenue committees are the ones helping set those budgets and adjusting those budgets. And within that committee, there's the budget review subcommittees, and that's on different topics. So when you go and look up your representatives and you figure out what committees they're on, it's a good thing to know about what level of influence they might have if they're serving on a committee. It's also good to be aware of the caucus structure. A caucus is basically a grouping. They don't have power like they do at the committee level, but there's still things that they may be influencing each other on. It can be a party-based caucus, issue-based, demographic-based. There's all kinds of different caucuses, and some are more active than others, but it's good to be aware because it shows your representatives' interests, and some of that kind of behind the scenes influencing and decision making can happen at the caucus level. Next slide, please. So to find out more about Kentucky issues, the Legislative Research Commission is a really great resource. It's called LRC, is how you'll hear a lot of people in state government refer to it. Technically, it's a commission. It's a 15 or 16 member commission. But also when people are saying LRC, it's more often described as both the nonpartisan and partisan support staff, the administrative support staff of the legislature. And they have a website that has a lot of really great information. Some of these links go to that. One of which is Bill Watch. You can actually go on there and sign up for alerts based on topics of your interest, and it'll email you if there's a bill that has something to do with that particular topic that you want to look at, or you can just go and browse. KET is also a great resource for finding coverage, both archived and for the Supreme Court as well, but they do archived and live coverage. Next slide, please. And I think we have maybe a minute to at least just pull this link up, but to find your legislator in Kentucky, you go to this link. You can also just kind of Google it. Again, this is an LRC website, but and we don't have to do this, but you type in your address and it pulls it up. Actually, we do have a minute. Oh, look, here's one. So if you view a bio page for either one of those, you can see where the contact information is there at the side, but you can also get a little bio information. You see what committees that person is on, what caucuses they're on. So that's a great way to find out more about your legislator. All right, if we can go back to the slide. So contacting your officials, you can write them, email them, call them. Again, that has if you find them on that page, that's a great way to do that. You can also schedule a visit with them. You can try to do that individually, but you can also, certain organizations have days at the Capitol that you can go and schedule visits with other like-minded folks. So Kentuckians for the Arts just had one maybe a week or two ago. Kentucky Nonprofit Day has one. Kentucky Library Advocacy Day. There's many more. And KMHA is interested in doing that in the future. Probably won't happen this year, unfortunately, but just know that's something that we do hope to kick off in the future. So that's my quick little rundown of state government and a little bit of federal government basics. And next, I'll turn it over to Leah Hamilton.
Thank you, Leah. It's so nice to be with you all today. And I should mention that we do plan to do a Q&A at the end. So you feel free to put questions as you think of them in the chat, but do know that we will have a more informal chat. We'll do some Q&A in a little bit. But to build off of what Leah was saying about finding your legislator and contacting them, just a few ideas and tips that can be used and that are a bit tried and trusted. I have a photo here of just January 22nd before the winter storm hit, when we were all feeling maybe a little more rested. But it was a reminder to me, meeting with legislators during Kentuckians for the Arts Day, that they really do want to hear from their constituents. And one good strategy is not only speaking with them at these great advocacy days and going to the Capitol, but it also was a reminder that it's wonderful to invite them to your events. So using that Find Your Legislator tab and looking at the senator and representative from your voting district is a really big deal, because they will want to meet with you, especially if they know that you are a voter in their district. And I found this to be very true. January 22nd, Senator Mays Bledsoe is my senator from where I live. And she was not able to meet, even though we had a scheduled appointment. And she gave her staffer her cell phone number. And she called me while she was on the road during our appointment time, which was going over and beyond what I would have expected. But it just went to show me that they really do want to hear from us. They want to talk about what our concerns are, our issues, or what we're advocating for. So don't be afraid to do it. And also, you'll be, I think, have the most success if you look for those representatives and senators that you vote for from your district and let them know you are a voter in their district, because that'll be a motivator for them to meet with you. It's helpful to have a one-page brief of information. And I know later Maggie is going to give you some wonderful resources so that you don't feel like you have to create that brief yourself. But it can also be a letter that you can leave. And if you are meeting with them in person, I like to always have a copy of that brief or letter with me so I can reference it. No matter how many times I've done this, I always get nervous meeting one-on-one with legislators. So it's nice to have that copy, a little cheat sheet to keep with you. I also really feel strongly that, in talking with a lot of colleagues and also students that I teach, that there is a barrier, a feeling like you have to be an expert on all of these issues and be up to date. And right now, with social media and technology, it's really hard to stay up to date with everything and all the policies and legislative actions at the different levels of government. So it's okay to not be an expert. Even in my meeting with Representative Moore, you'll see pictured there, he asked me a question about return on investment. And I didn't have exact numbers for him. So I just said, I actually don't know, but I will go and find out. And I did. And I sent him an email the following week. So it's okay to not know it all. And I think they understand that. I also had this wonderful exchange with the staff member of Senator Mays Bledsoe. She was really critical in helping connect me when the senator couldn't meet with me. So it was a reminder that getting to know their staff, and you may not, especially at the federal level, you may not be able to meet with your senator or rep or congressperson. So getting to know their staffers and talking to them can be just as good, and building a trusted relationship with them. And this last slide kind of leads me into the next part about legal restrictions. I know many of us are working for 501c3 charitable nonprofits. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the legal restrictions based on IRS policy. And I'll put in the chat a link to the IRS website. I know that sounds riveting on this Tuesday afternoon. But there are some legal restrictions that I think are helpful to know. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Maggie. So there are different actions around what I think is broadly termed advocacy. We use the term advocacy to mean a lot of things, but in the legal realm, they are divided up into different types of activities. So I thought I would just go over them briefly today and talk about what is allowed and what is restricted, not only for individuals that are public employees, but maybe working for 501c3 nonprofits, but also what you should feel empowered to do as a private citizen too. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. But education is really just increasing understanding. When you are talking to an elected official, this is usually nonpartisan, factual information, so you can include statistics or reports, but generally education is seen as being neutral. So you're not giving a specific opinion or a call to action in this way. And this is always allowed for 501c3s. There are no restrictions on working with legislators and elected officials to educate them on topics that are important to you. And advocacy is also unrestricted for nonprofit organizations. And I say that knowing it's staff and board volunteers that are working for these five or representing 501c3s. This is where you're going to be expressing support for your cultural heritage organization, or maybe talking about cultural heritage issues more broadly. So you can frame the information around how a policy or an issue may impact your organization, how it may impact the cultural heritage sector as a whole for the state or the nation, or maybe just your community if you're talking to your mayor or your county official. Then we get into lobbying. And I think this is an important distinction to know because, again, we use advocacy very broadly. But anytime you're making a specific argument, so asking an elected official to support or oppose a policy or a bill, that is technically lobbying. And this is allowed for 501c3s or staff members of 501c3s, but with restrictions. There are other nonprofit sections in the IRS regulations, I guess you could say, 501c4s, 5s, and 6s that allow lobbying in some ways unrestricted, but for charitable organizations, it cannot be a substantial part of what we do as a nonprofit organization. So I did a little research today just to make sure that I felt confident saying this. But right now in the United States, there is not a cultural heritage organization that has ever had a fine or been shut down that's publicly available for doing too much lobbying. So I think there's maybe a general understanding that there is this restriction, and that if an organization was wanting to make lobbying a substantial part, they would just have a different IRS distinction that wasn't a 501c3. But generally, there are two different types of lobbying. There's direct, which is speaking with your elected officials, and then there's grassroots, which is where we're building that general community of support around an issue or a particular bill. And then lastly, electioneering, and this is fully restricted. So basically, this would be against IRS laws for any staff member, employee, volunteer, or board representing a 501c3. And this is where you would be vocally supporting or opposing a political candidate. So again, a 501c4, 5, or 6 would be staff members and volunteers would be eligible to do this. But with a 501c3, that is fully restricted. So to give some examples of what this might look like in action, Maggie, if you could, thank you. Go to the next slide. So an example would be of education. I put little samples here. According to national studies, cultural heritage sites have a significant impact on tourism, increasing local spending by so much amount. So this would be that neutral statement where you're providing factual information, but you're not necessarily giving or expressing support or against something. Then with advocacy, you can frame it a little bit more about how it may impact your own organization. So supporting our local museum shapes our city's identity, improves education, and is a driver of economic activity in our city and state. So you're framing it and you're showing support, but you're not necessarily coming out and saying you need to support a particular bill or issue. Now that's where we move into lobbying. And right here, it's very direct. Please vote to support Senate Bill number 123 to increase funding for our state's cultural heritage. And that would be considered lobbying because you're asking for support for a particular issue. And then electioneering would be you saying, I oppose this candidate for the Kentucky House of Representatives because their stance on cultural heritage will harm the state. And now there may be a lot of you on this call that feel like, okay, so now knowing what I am not supposed to do as a representative of a nonprofit. What does that mean? Maybe if I, as an individual, if I'm working for a nonprofit, or if I am a state employee, because I have my own personal opinions that I may not be able to express on behalf of my organization or agency. So just to clarify, can a cultural 501c3 participate in a political campaign? No. And you'll see there's the IRS website link in the chat that shows you what this substantial part test is. And honestly, it's a very complex case that one would have to build looking at a lot of different things, not just finances, to know if it was a substantial part. But again, this means you are not supposed to express opposition or support for a candidate. You cannot make campaign contributions as a 501c3 toward a candidate's run. And that also includes rating or ranking candidates based on personal views. So there are polls out there. So you really want to be careful not to represent your organization, even in expressing those kinds of views with ranking and polls. Now, can you support or oppose political campaigns as a private citizen? Yes, absolutely. And we should be involved as part of our civic duty as individuals in the United States. But especially right now with the political climate, it is a very, and social media, I should say, it's very gray sometimes what we are saying as private citizens if we are also working for a public agency or working for a nonprofit. So this is what I have found to be the safest way to go about this, that you can express support or oppose political campaigns or issues, but to do it on your personal time. And that also means on your personal devices and accounts and using your own money. And this is tricky because if you have a work computer, but maybe you're on your private social media account, I mean, it is possible to go back and then they could say, no, you were using a public piece of equipment or your organization's equipment. So I think it's really important to make sure everything shows that this is being done from you personally. And then also really expressing very clearly that this is a personal opinion and you're acting as a private citizen. I think this is important, especially for public employees right now, that you're not acting or expressing viewpoints on behalf of your organization. And also, I think if you have concern about what you're posting or what you want to do, if you are a public employee, to consult your agency's rules and regulations. And I'm seeing here that there was supposed to be a link that you can access if you are a state employee with some of those regulations. And I'll put that in the chat in just a minute. Okay, and I have no idea. I may have gone over my time. I think we're okay. So just lastly, and then I'll hand it over to Maggie, some tips for messaging, ways of feeling successful in your work in advocacy. And this goes across new I guess, the new political climate right now, which is pretty divisive, and how we can be effective talking to elected officials that are across the political spectrum. So, keeping your message very focused, making sure that the points are aligning with exactly what you want to talk about, and making sure that if it's a state issue, to talk about that with state elected officials. But if it's a national issue like the NEH or Library of Congress and or IMLS, that you're talking to your federal legislators about those things, because state legislators won't be able to do anything about federal policy. And that can be a little confusing sometimes. Keeping the message positive. There's a lot of data that shows that in advocacy messaging with elected officials, please, that keeping it positive and talking about positive change is really the way to go. And then crafting it to make sure, we're all experts in cultural heritage and then the arts on this call. I'm guessing based on the membership here, but it can be really hard when we're experts in this area not to use certain language that may feel foreign to some elected officials. So trying to use as common, I guess, of language, or language that doesn't feel attributed to a specific expertise, I think is a good way to go. And also framing it. I really feel strongly about doing research on your elected officials before you meet with them and trying to frame whatever you're asking for to match their priorities. Going in with my own priorities about, let's say, arts advocacy in museums, I have a lot of priorities regarding funding, and I have ways to talk about it. But if my elected official is all about economic impact, then I'm going to have to not talk about that intrinsic value that I know is there, and I'm going to have to give them a lot of numbers, like the Representative Moore, who was asking about return on investment. And I didn't have those numbers, but like that, you need to know what interests and intrigues them and try to match that language. So that's what I mean by framing. And lastly, just practicing with your dog, with your partner, with your child who might be home now for the past 10 days and you don't know what to talk about anymore. Good time to practice whatever your advocacy message is before you go talk to an elected official. And Maggie, I'll pass it to you for resources.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. So I just wanted to spend a little time talking about resources for cultural advocacy. I care about museums, I care about history, and culture and the arts, but I cannot navigate Congress. It's challenging. That's not a skill set of mine. And so knowing where the resources are is huge. So I know if I go to this one particular website, I can find information and up-to-date advocacy alerts, so that I'm aware of it and know how to participate. So I wanted to cover some of those resources. So we'll talk about navigating cultural advocacy broadly, and then we'll kind of focus on framing impact for history organizations, and then we'll go into some Kentucky specific impact reports as examples. So the American Alliance of Museums has everyone had a chance to, have you heard of this institution or this group? Yeah, some thumbs up, good. So they have wonderful advocacy resources. So they have a whole page dedicated to it. And you can have so much fun navigating for hours on end. I'll try to be, oh, thank you, Leah just dropped it in the chat. I'll try to be very specific on which areas I want to highlight today. So I'm going to focus specifically on the guide to working with new Congress, as well as economic and education impact statements and how to craft those. But you can have a lot of fun kind of digging into these resources. So I'm going to get onto the website. Okay. So basically, when you go to the AAM website, you don't have to be a member to use these resources. You go to aam-us.org, and then it'll have you on the main page, and you can go to the About Museums tab, and then under that, you'll see Advocacy. So that's where I am right now. And then I'm going to go into, if I go into the Browse section, I'm going to go into Advocacy Resources. Click in there. And again, a lot of content. I'm going to scroll down to the tools to advocate. And you can see just how many resources they have. So this is a national organization. So when they talk about find your legislators, it's more often your federal legislators. Members of the U.S. Senate and Congress, or House of Representatives, excuse me. But some of the communication styles and language you can definitely apply to your Kentucky representatives. So I'm going to go into the AAM guide to working with new Congress because it just reiterates some of the great content that both the Leahs have already talked about. So in here, it's basically, this is a document to cover how to introduce or reintroduce your institution, your museum, during when Congress people shift over. So every 2 years, new and returning legislators are sworn in. And then that first session of the new Congress begins. And so that's always a great time to contact them and get to know them and help them get to know you and your institution. So they have in this document a link to finding your legislator on that federal level, and then guidelines for introducing yourself in your museum, how to engage with them, whether it's direct messaging, writing a letter, writing an impact report, or just reaching out on social media and tagging them, be like, welcome, I hope you're at the start of your term goes well, that kind of thing. And I'll reiterate something again that Leah H. said right here at the bottom of the document. Your constituency is your superpower. So again, they want to hear from you, and that is proven, according to data, that is one of the major influencing factors, is that direct constituent relationship or interaction. All right, so that is working with new Congress. I'm going to go back to that advocacy page. And I'm going to click into, I have 2 impact reports that I'm going to cover. So this is economic impact statement. So click into that and it provides you with a great basic template. And this is that one pager potentially that Leah Hamilton was talking about. So these are things that, chances are you're collecting this data anyways. And so make it a habit of at your institution every January at the start of a new year, or if you want to do it based on your fiscal year, however it works best for you. Record these numbers and put them into a nice little report, and have that. Then you can send it off to your legislators, or you can kind of keep it, post it on your website, post it publicly. So this economic impact report covers your basics. So the number of people your museum employs, the amount spent on goods and services locally in your community, how many visitors you have, how many of them are from out of town versus local. How many school children you're serving, and your admission fee. And then what I love about this template is right here at the bottom, they have this additional data to help contextualize your information. So they have national information that again just drives the point home. It taps or it connects you to the larger field, which is really helpful. So that's great. Up here they have samples if you want to look into it, but we'll look into some samples on our slide deck later. Okay, then I want to cover educational impact statements. So again, very similar. You have a basic template, and it's looking at information that again you're probably tracking, the amount spent by your museum on educational programming, number of students participating, how many districts served, how many school children served, admission fees, things like that. And then again, it has that data at the end to contextualize your information. So really helpful as a resource to put together that one pager. So that's AAM. Again, you could go into so many of these categories. They're really helpful, and we'll go into a few more later, but those are the basic ones that I wanted to share very quickly for that. And then next up, another resource I have is from the American Association for State and Local History. Again, another organization that we're probably familiar with. They have a great advocacy page as well. And their advocacy, in a lot of ways, it's geared more toward the current political climate. So what I mean by that is they are kind of tracking impacts, direct impacts, to the history field. So it can be really helpful in kind of looking at legislation that's come out in the last year or so, and then how the history field is responding as a whole. One of the things that they're doing that's very interesting is they're collecting stories of impact. So they have a survey. You can contribute directly, and that's one of the images that I have over here is just a screenshot of some of these stories. And as you can see, these are just, paragraphs of information on how certain things are impacting their institution, their organization. And what this ends up doing is kind of creates a record or a snapshot for future advocacy work. So what you collect now can help inform the future. So a few of those examples, you can read them, but I'll just call out, let's see, the Venice Heritage Museum. A small one-year-old museum in California took on the stewardship of thousands of items donated by its community with the understanding that they would hire an archivist to preserve and make accessible this new collection. A pending grant with IMLS to fund the hiring of this physician is now at risk. So quick statement, we in the field know those impacts. You're risking community and public trust. You have these collections that were donated by the community, and you're risking that they won't be processed and made accessible due to funding losses that were perhaps there before. So you can read through those stories of impact. It's on the AASLH advocacy website that Leah Hamilton just shared. So I also want to talk about the AASLH reframing history framework. There's a lot of frame in that sentence, but reframing history framework is basically it's a project that AASLH initiated in 2022 to help the field talk about the work that we do. So to talk about the value of history and history practitioners. And so they have it's great. It's a quick read. It's about, maybe 8-9 pages, something like that. So I highly recommend if you're in the field of history, if you're at a historic site, historical society, that you check that out. They also have a toolkit that you can download with kind of quick advice. And the page that I shared is keeping conversations on track. So it's just guidance on how to help move the conversation forward in a productive way when talking about the role of history and historians and kind of the critical thinking involved in that work, and could potentially help you get out of a tricky spot if you're with a legislator that you might not know where to go with the next sentence. You remember your little toolkit back here, and that might help you. Okay. Next up, I have a few Kentucky specific impact reports and examples of these kind of impact stories. So these are 2 Kentucky impact reports that are created by institutions on a national level. So AAM created the first one up top that we see, museums as economic engines, and they have state specific data. Now, I will say this is from 2017. They haven't done an updated one, but this was a very comprehensive, very intensive survey that they conducted. And so some of the numbers might be outdated, but it still is a nice snapshot of impact during that particular period. And you can use that honestly as a tool to determine growth or decreases. So you can see in this economic impact report, it has information on jobs. It has income that employees have made. It also has economic impact for the state that the field has on the state. So I also have the NEA's economic impact report, and this is from 2023. I'm sure they have more recent data, but this was on their website. You can go and get state specific information, and this is for arts economies. So you can see they also have a value added to the state's economy by the arts, and that's a nice figure, $6.9 billion. I like this one as well because it has the percentage of the entire state's economy. So again, contextualizing that information. It has employment data, so job numbers, and then compensation. So those are the kind of core numbers that these economic impact reports have. Now I have a few reports from Kentucky organizations. So we have the Kentuckians for the Arts and the Kentucky Travel Industry Association. So first, the Kentuckians for the Arts, again, they pull some of that national data that you saw in the NEA report. So they have the numbers, economic activity and employment and compensation. But then they also have further information that helps drive the point home. So they talk about how it impacts families, how it impacts the future. And then at the end of their statement, their two-pager, they have a call to action. So they say in 2026, restore Kentucky Arts Council funding to at least the 2001 level of 4.5 million annually. So they have a call to action specifically there. Then with the travel Industry Association, they have their figures, and this was a new report that came out. I think it's 2024 numbers, but it's fairly recent. So total economic impact for tourism, or of tourism, excuse me, in Kentucky for 2024 was 14.3 billion. So you've seen that number, I'm sure, time and time again. The administration is using that information in Kentucky because those are pretty great figures, but they're also reiterating down at the bottom that Kentucky has comparatively low funding for tourism at tourism work. And so they kind of end with a Kentucky tourism is a sleeping giant call to action, saying we could be doing more and we can continue to grow this number. So they're using their numbers and they're talking about how they could do more with more, basically. So again, positive messaging in that way. And then I want to look at a site-specific impact report that, again, you can do with your institution every year in whatever way you choose. So this is from the Kentucky Historical Society, and this is 2024. And so in here they cover how many students participated in programming. They talk about how many visitors they had and where those visitors were from, whether they were local or again out of state or out of the region. They talk about their social media engagement and programming. So great numbers to again just show impact. Okay. And then I want to move into our current issues and calls to action. So again, these are still resources that you can find. I've pulled AAM resources as well as the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. So we'll get into this great table in just one moment. But before we do, I want to hop into some of the advocacy alerts. So this is on AAM's site again. It's within that advocacy resource tab. And it's something called advocacy alerts. These come out fairly regularly and they kind of give you very specific information and updates on what's going on and how you can help. So I'm going to click into the January advocacy alert. And I'll point out right here. So there is a National Advocacy Day. It's called Museums Advocacy Day. And it's a really great initiative. It's usually in February. This year is at the end of February, the 23rd and 24th. The deadline, unfortunately, has already passed. But if you get a chance in the future to participate, it's really rewarding. Leah Craig, if you want to talk any more about that, because you participated last year, you're more than welcome to do that, or we can do it during the Q&A, whatever works better. Q&A? Okay. So Museums Advocacy Day, but then you scroll down and it has an appropriations update. So this is talking about NEA, NEH funding, as well as IMLS funding. So in this particular update, it says Congress has officially started consideration of a 3-bill funding package for fiscal year 2026. The 3 funding bills included in this package cover a number of agencies and grant programs of interest to museums, including the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, science agencies, National Park Service, and many of the historic preservation related programs. Strong collective advocacy efforts, or thanks to strong collective advocacy efforts, many of these programs received the same funding as fiscal year 25, including the NEA and NEH, despite the president's budget request to eliminate funding for these agencies. And several museums also received earmarks, which is congressional directed spending in the bill. So that's definitely great to hear because quite a few Kentucky institutions use that funding. And then it has a separate update on the IMLS, which is the Institute of Museum. Is it for or of? Institute of Museum and Library Services. I think that's it. Oh, it's right here. It's in the paragraph. Sorry, everyone. It says the funding bill that contains the Institute of Museum and Library Services is a massive funding bill that includes the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education. So they say in here that it's usually pretty difficult to pass, but they're looking at proposing similar funding levels for IMLS and the Office of Museum Services. So it's just kind of an update on that they're trying to keep it up. I also want to go to the policy issues page. And I won't go through every single one of these, but this is another one that you can get lost in. There are quite a few policies that they just want to highlight. So these are ongoing. Usually it's not tied specifically to kind of a package, but it's just things to keep in mind. So they talk about tax policy and the earmark span, National Endowment for the Humanities and Arts, that kind of thing. So definitely check that out. And then one more AAM tab I want to open is AAM Contact Congress. So again, this is something that you can get to through the AAM advocacy page. And this is really directed. So it's saying, you know, you want, based on what's currently going on, urge Congress to support critical funding for the Office of Museum Services at IMLS. And so you can click on the Take Action button. You can type in your address, and it takes you to, let's do 11. And it takes you, these are senators or representatives, and then it has kind of language that you can use. And you can send it directly from here, again, without being a member, or you can print and mail or a preview. So you don't have to take action immediately, but it gives you kind of guidance there. All right, so now back to this table. So this is such a wonderful snapshot. And Leah Hamilton, if you want to jump in here as well, this is a great snapshot on what's going on and with funding dollars for the appropriations. So those numbers are really promising on this table. So some of them, you know, the NEA, NEH, IMLS, those last year's funding, last fiscal year, you see those numbers. They called to be zeroed out, but you can see U.S. House approved in or in the Appropriations Committee some of the funds, and then the Senate approved increases actually in some of those as well. And then we're still waiting on the final results, but that's just wonderful news. So that is what I have on calls to action. In terms of how you make the ask, again, AAM has those direct contact links if you want to do it that way, or you can reach out directly to your legislator and have that impact statement or that specific call to action. So what questions do we have?
Yeah, thank you all so much for so much wonderful information. And if you want this information, I can send out, I'll send out this recording to everybody who was on here, and I'm sure Leah, and Maggie would be happy to answer questions off the chat here as well, if you had them. But are there any questions that we can talk about now? All right. Maggie, Leah, and Leah, do you have any last thoughts of anything you didn't talk about that maybe you want to hit a little more strongly, or something that you didn't get to?
I'll just encourage people that kind of as private citizens, a way that I have found making it easier to advocate is to make it as easy on yourself as possible, and any little thing any little further step you can take to do helps. So, for instance, I've put my uh, 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 senators and legislators their contact information in my phone. So that way it's really easy to just go and call that number and leave a message, or have it saved in your email or something like that. So that way it just kind of takes that barrier. We're all busy, and yeah, it just any way you can make it a little bit easier on yourself, like those AAM tools that Maggie was saying that has the messaging already there. You just kind of click and send. So that's a tip I have as a general word of advice.
Mhm. I'll reiterate what you both have said. Again, it's anyone can participate. You don't feel that you have to know exactly what you're saying. Like Leah Hamilton said, just um, being willing to participate is such a major step. So yeah, I just encourage you to get involved in whatever way you're comfortable, but you don't have to be an expert to talk to your legislators.
All right. Well, thank you to all three of you for such a wealth of information. This was really enlightening. This will all be available on KMHA's website and on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sure to send this out in our next newsletter as well so that you have access to this. And then I see that Leah and Leah have dropped their information in the chat if you want to reach out to them directly. And it looks like Maggie's typing too. Yep. So all of those email addresses are there for you if you want to grab those if you have further questions. But thank you again for joining us for this program. Our next Learn at Lunch will be on February 24th, and we'll actually be talking about a really, really interesting project called the Mary Street Midden. This project is happening in the Germantown neighborhood of Louisville. Patrick Donnelly is someone who discovered an absolute wealth of material in a property that he owned that was built on an old dump site in Louisville, and so has been excavating this incredible site and just finding incredible ways to tell stories through objects about that local community. A really unique project, so I hope you'll join us on February 24th to learn about a little bit more about that project and what the plans for the future are for that collection. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks,
Thank
Jessica.
you.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.